Tonight on Ukraine Today. Burning oil refineries in Ufa, one of the largest oil processing centers in Russia, was attacked. A fuel depot in the temporarily occupied Feodosia was also hit again. The situation on the battlefield. Since the start of the Dobropillia operation, Ukraine's defense forces have already liberated at least 182 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. Intriguing announcements. Ukraine's president spoke about a serious piece of news, and the US permanent representative to NATO hinted at important updates on new weapon supplies to Ukraine. The Tomahawk story. The United States unveiled a new mobile launcher for these missiles. But how exactly is it connected to Ukraine? All that and more, right now. Hello everyone, my name is Volodymyr Robchun. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and let's move to the news. Let's start with Ukrainian strikes. In Ufa, which is in Russia, one of the country's largest oil refineries came under attack. It supplies the occupier's army with fuel and lubricants, which makes this facility a fully legitimate target. Ukraine's General Staff confirmed several successful strikes on Russian military sites in the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories. Defense forces hit a radar station in Crimea, a drone control center in the Kherson region, and an enemy ammunition depot in the Donetsk region. Also confirmed another strike on a fuel depot in temporarily occupied Feodosia. Ukrainian assault units advanced more than 1.5 kilometers in some areas of the Pokrovsk direction. Overall, since the beginning of the Dobropillia operation, at least 182 square kilometers of Ukrainian land have been liberated. More details in the report.
More than 100 Ukrainian drones were shot down on the night of October 13th over temporarily occupied Crimea. There is no information about those that were not shot down. However, we can confidently say that some successfully landed on their intended targets. Even after 2 days, they were unable to extinguish the Feodosia oil depot, the smoke from which could be seen from a distance of 10 kilometers. The Southern Transport Prosecutor's Office reported that the incident at the oil depot in Crimea caused delays in railway traffic. Ensuring the rights of passengers was entrusted to law enforcement officers. It seems like a punishment since they still failed to protect the peninsula from drones. Meanwhile, the presidents of the US and Ukraine, Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, will hold talks at the White House about supplying Tomahawks to Ukraine.
The Financial Times is already saying that, well, there will only be a few, between 20 and 50 Tomahawks, but the very fact itself matters. So it's not that they're saying there won't be any, but rather that there will only be a few. In other words, it already feels like this decision has basically been made. Tomahawks would mean strikes deeper into Russia. The first target that comes to my mind is Zavod, the Russian tank manufacturer. It could also be other military targets on Russian territory that are located a significant distance from Ukraine and which we currently cannot reach with the means we have at this stage.
The Kremlin has officially authorized the deployment of reservists in combat operations abroad. The document opens up the possibility of using the mobilization reserve, about 5 million people outside of Russia.
Turkey is acting confident. We do not see this same confidence that Turkey has in our European partners, but again, European partners must also understand that Russia is step by step preparing for war with Europe. This needs to be understood, and it needs to be constantly discussed within the European countries themselves. And the decision regarding reservists, in my opinion, is yet another clear message that Russia is preparing specifically for this war. Because, as I like to quote the Israeli military journalist Sergei Auslender, Russia produces a lot of military equipment that we do not see on the battlefields of Russia's war against Ukraine. The question is, if a country is waging a war and producing military equipment, and this military equipment is not present where it is needed most, in the very war that this country is fighting, then it means this equipment is being stockpiled for other purposes. And the question is, for what purposes? At that time, the answer was simple: a war against Europe.
The American press reports that China has increased its supply of components for combat drones to Russia tenfold.
When you need this war to continue, you don't want either side to win. That is, China doesn't want Ukraine to win, but it also doesn't want Russia to win. It will support Russia just enough for Russia to keep fighting. But if China gets the sense that Russia is achieving some successes that could lead to the end of the war, China will limit its support because, I repeat, it also does not want Russia to win.
Russia could attack NATO countries much sooner than Europe predicts, according to the Institute for the Study of War. Similar information that the Kremlin could attack EU countries at any moment was shared by the head of German intelligence.
Here, without a doubt, Europe must realize, as the British Defence Minister during Rishi Sunak's government, Mr. Shapps, said, if anyone thought that the era of war was just something in history textbooks, no, the era of war is the present in which we live.
Ukrainian defenders from the 1st Azov Corps of the National Guard repelled an enemy assault involving 16 pieces of military equipment. During the fighting, the Ukrainians destroyed 9 infantry fighting vehicles, 4 armored personnel carriers, 3 tanks and 3 motorcycles. Enemy losses amounted to 78 servicemen from the occupying army.
Over the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,070 soldiers killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion that makes 1,126,220 invaders. In the same period, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 2 armored vehicles, 43 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy equipment. An interesting comment came from the President of the United States. According to him, Russia has lost 1.5 million soldiers. Trump added that he still does not understand why Putin continues this war against Ukraine.
Look, I'm very disappointed because Vladimir and I had a very good relationship, probably still do. I don't know why he continues with this war. This war has been so bad for him. He's going into 4 years of a war that he should have won that war in 1 week. He's now going to soon be into his 4th year. He's lost 1.5 million soldiers, probably, close. Certainly in terms of wounded and no legs and no arms and all the things that happen in horrible wars. It's a horrible war. That's the biggest thing that's happened since World War II in terms of death.
The number of occupiers keeps shrinking, which means Russian reservists will soon be sent to the front lines. The so-called Russian government has already approved a new mobilization initiative proposed by the so-called Defense Ministry. Looks like those who hope to sit this one out will now face the hell of this war. Details next.
About 2 million Russians. That's how many more people the Kremlin can now send to fight in Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Defense has come up with a way to launch mobilization essentially just by renaming it. This concerns a new bill that has been supported by the Government Commission. This is a document that allows the use of reservists during peacetime.
The Ministry of Defense's bill, which sets the conditions for involving reservists in tasks during peacetime, is aimed at expanding the range of uses for this category of personnel. The point of the amendments is to broaden the scope of application for this group of service members. That's the only point. Andrei Kartapolov, head of the State Duma Defense Committee.
State Duma Representative Andrei Kartapolov, who is known for his repeated radical statements regarding the so-called special military operation, explained that the authorities have specified the conditions for deploying reservists. These are people who previously volunteered to serve in the Russian army, received payments and benefits for it, and are now in the reserve. In reality, however, Russia is suffering enormous losses on the front lines. The number of new contract soldiers is decreasing, but losses still need to be replenished.
We see that the authorities are avoiding a second wave of mobilization, so they need a different procedure that would allow them to use the mobilization resource. Artem Kliga, human rights activist.
The draft law allows reservists to be sent to war in Ukraine during peacetime under the guise of so-called special training assemblies.
Special assemblies are a new type of military assembly that the authors of the draft law propose to include in the law on military duty and military service, specifically in Article 54, military assemblies. Currently, there are 2 categories of military assemblies listed there, training assemblies and inspection assemblies. They propose to add a 3rd category to these, special assemblies. As stated in the law, special assemblies are military assemblies for carrying out specific tasks in the field of defense during armed conflicts, during certain operations, as well as when deploying the military outside the country. Only reservists will undergo them. The procedure for conducting special assemblies will be determined by the President. Their duration cannot exceed 2 months.
Perhaps this scheme is for those who have not been willing to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense until now, but who are ready to fight for a couple of months. Maybe this is the Kremlin's way of hedging its bets in case there is a severe shortage of recruits. But after the amendments to the law on military service are signed, those who refuse to go to war in Ukraine could easily end up behind bars. There are plenty of empty spots there.
The current Russian legislation, which criminalizes normal political life, is such that today anyone can be thrown in prison. And if anyone can be thrown in prison and the camps have emptied after a huge number of people were sent to the front and killed there, then they can be filled up again. Here's another reserve. That's why I think Putin will make decisions based on tactical considerations at the last moment, when it becomes necessary, when they urgently need to send another 50,000 or 30,000 people to the front.
The reserve of the Russian army consists of Russians who have voluntarily signed a contract. The decree establishing this reserve was signed by Putin in 2015. Reservists undergo military training every year. Usually, the mobilization reserve consists of former contract soldiers. There are about 2 million such people in Russia, and in the near future, these Russians could be used in the war in Ukraine without declaring martial law or announcing a second wave of mobilization in Russia.
Last night, the occupiers deliberately attacked Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Emergency blackouts were introduced in Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Kirovograd, Kharkiv, Cherkasy and Chernihiv regions. Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now is the perfect moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. And please share it so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Today, the Ukraine NATO Council and another Ramstein meeting are taking place. Yesterday, US Permanent Representative to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, said that important announcements on new weapon deliveries to Ukraine can be expected. We are watching this closely. By the way, Finland has joined the Pearl Initiative, a program for joint US weapon purchases for Ukraine. The Finnish Defense Ministry also announced a new military aid package. So maybe that's exactly what Mr. Whitaker was referring to. Maybe not. Ukraine's President Zelensky also teased a serious piece of news. In his evening address, he said one of Ukraine's European partners is directly involved.
Today, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha reported on the tasks that need to be fulfilled in the European direction. Diplomats from the President's office also reported on our defense agreements with one of the countries. We are preparing important news for next week, together with one of our partners in Europe.
He did not specify which country or what the news is about, but we will know soon. Probably next week or maybe even earlier. So subscribe to stay tuned. The war, according to Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, could last at least 3 more years. He called on Europe and the United States to prepare for long-term support of Ukraine, including more ammunition and long-range Tomahawks missiles. By the way, Sikorski recently brought a Russian Shahed drone to the British Parliament to show what Russia terrorized Ukraine with. Speaking of Tomahawks, the US has just unveiled a brand new mobile launcher for these missiles. Up next, how this development connects to Russia's war in Ukraine.
A question that had long gone unanswered has finally been resolved. How can Ukraine launch Tomahawks if these are primarily sea-based missiles? This problem no longer exists. The solution was provided by the American arms manufacturer Oshkosh Defense. As it became known this year at the annual AUSA 2025 Arms Exhibition, the company unveiled 3 new products at once. These are mobile vehicles for launching medium and long-range missiles. The largest of them is the Oshkosh MAV, designed to launch Tomahawks from land.
This system was handed over to the Marine Corps, which used it experimentally to determine whether it was convenient to use and whether they should expand their arsenal with such launchers.
By the way, the XMAV is not the only solution for launching Tomahawks from land. Earlier, the US introduced the Typhoon missile system, which became the first US long-range missile launcher after withdrawing from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. As practice has shown, the system is reliable, but for the conditions of the war in Ukraine, it is not the best solution.
These are Mark 41 launch containers. They are directed upwards and then fire in almost the same way as from a submarine or a warship, and you can see how big and bulky they are. And it would be quite impractical to send these launchers, which are not available in large numbers, to Ukraine. It would be fairly easy for Russia to track these missiles back to their launch sites and strike not only the launcher itself, but also all the supporting equipment around it.
But the XMAV systems are a completely different story. Its exact specifications have not yet been disclosed. the new system has only just been presented to the general public. However, it can already be said with confidence that this is a much more mobile system, which greatly reduces the chances of being hit by return fire. At the same time, the system is also equipped with the capability to operate remotely.
It's an autonomous vehicle that can also be controlled remotely, like in a video game, using a special joystick. Our Marines are already quite familiar with this. It can also be used as a transport vehicle that moves toward the group. So you have one leader and the rest of the vehicles follow it in convoy mode. The most important and crucial thing is that it is highly mobile, it possesses a thoroughly proven, exceptionally robust chassis, and at the very same time, it can effectively carry several different payloads all at once for comprehensive, long-range fire support operations.
Meanwhile, headlines in global media are already filled with insider reports from Washington. For example, the Financial Times writes that Ukraine may soon receive up to 50 Tomahawk missiles, with the minimum number reportedly being considered for delivery being several dozen.
This is a missile that can fly very close to the ground. It has an effective terrain-following mode. It has a rather large warhead, almost 500 kilograms. And out of all the missiles that are currently ready and available to NATO, this is the most powerful missile, the longest range and the most powerful.
It has also become known that Donald Trump has confirmed a planned meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky as soon as this coming Friday, October 17th. The key topic will be the supply of Tomahawks and their launchers. Considering that the West has already used Ukraine more than once to test its advanced weaponry, it is possible that the XMAV will undergo its first combat trial precisely under the supervision of the Ukrainian armed forces.
The key is not even the weapon itself. The key is the platform that enables its use. That is what needs to be discussed right now.
Meanwhile, Western analysts are already eagerly compiling a list of possible Tomahawk targets in Russia. The most reckless of these is a strike on the Kremlin. Other top targets include the Crimean Bridge and military facilities across the Russian Federation.
Let's take Odessa as an example of a possible launch point. It's not a given that the launches will be placed there. But as an example, here we have 2,500 kilometers. That's well beyond Moscow. This covers the European part of Russia and even Nizhny Tagil, where the legendary tank factory is located, producing the T-72 and now the T-90, as well as a huge number of other targets that would fall within the strike zone.
It's also worth noting that the further the process of transferring Tomahawks to Ukraine goes, the more panic grows inside Russia. This indirectly proves that these threats are too much for Russian air defense to handle. This time, the Kremlin publicly made Lukashenko take the heat. He has already stated that if the missiles are transferred, a nuclear war will begin. However, just like in the fable about the boy who cried wolf, no one has believed the threats of this mustachioed boy for a long time now.
And finally, about the nuclear threat from Russia and its allies. South Korea has decided to build its first civilian nuclear bunker. All the details in our next report.
South Korea is preparing for war. For the first time, Seoul will build a civilian nuclear bunker due to threats from North Korea and Russia. According to the South Korean leader, Pyongyang continues to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear warheads.
It seems they haven't succeeded yet, but they are in the final stages. All that remains is the so-called re-entry technology. This will likely be resolved in the near future as well.
The underground shelter will be designed to protect civilians from possible nuclear, biological and chemical attacks. It will be located on the third basement level of a new residential complex.
This concerns the possibility of actual nuclear weapons being used in a preemptive strike on South Korean territory. Moreover, in the past month, North Korea has conducted several successful tests, even of strategic nuclear weapons. All of this signals that North Korea is considering the path of escalating tensions between the two Koreas and the possibility of shifting the theater of military operations to neighboring territories.
Relations between North Korea and South Korea have remained tense and unstable since the end of the Korean War, which concluded with an armistice but not a peace agreement. Formally, both countries are still at war. Although there have been periodic attempts to establish dialogue, no significant rapprochement has occurred. The main obstacles remain North Korea's nuclear program and the joint military exercises conducted by South Korea and the United States.
South Korea is well aware of the possible scenarios for how events may unfold. North Korea's nuclear program is the primary threat to the very existence of South Korea. Moreover, the recent statements by North Korean leadership about the possibility of launching a nuclear strike even against Ukraine indicate that there is in fact not only irrationality in their statements, but also accordingly in the actions of the North Korean leadership. And the continued militarization of North Korea suggests that apparently only a military scenario for the unification of the two Koreas is being considered.
In June 2024, North Korea sent balloons filled with trash into South Korea. And in April 2025, North Korean soldiers violated the South Korean border. At that time, warning shots were fired.
Those statements from the military and political leadership of North Korea indicate that they are prepared to use both conventional and, accordingly, nuclear weapons for preemptive strikes on South Korean territory.
South Korea, in turn, is firmly prepared for any security threats after demonstrating new weapon systems to North Korea.
South Korea is a strategic partner of the United States outside of the NATO bloc, and the statement by the United States that in the event of possible military advances by the DPRK, the United States will provide South Korea with all military assistance, both conventional and, accordingly, the possibility of using the United States nuclear arsenal. This primarily serves to deter the DPRK from further escalating military tensions on the Korean peninsula. But at the same time, it should not be forgotten that the Russian Federation uses the DPRK factor as a way to divert the attention of the United States from the processes taking place both in Ukraine and on the European continent.
The new president of South Korea has stated his intention to improve strained relations with Pyongyang, but his offer of dialogue was rejected by North Korea. Lee Jae-myung believes that Donald Trump may be the only person capable of becoming a negotiating partner for the DPRK.
This is a war of ideologies, and any attempts by South Korea to seek compromise through diplomatic means will be met with a lack of understanding from the military and political leadership of the DPRK. It should be noted that the very possibility of confrontation between the two systems is the main backbone of the existence of the DPRK's communist regime over the past decades.
North Korea is actively developing its nuclear program and missile technologies, demonstrating military strength in response to international sanctions and political pressure.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. See you next time.